What I like to do is to divide it up, and in this case, this video is going to be on installing the Old Man Emu springs, and it has several parts. We need to prepare the hardware, paint the springs, powder coat all the shackles and the mounts, and insert the bushings. I think we'll start with painting the springs. Before we paint over everything, let's talk about what's printed on the springs. On each spring there's an arrow, and the arrow points to the stationary mount that the spring is supposed to go to. The plus, the minus, and the 0 represent where the spring fell in the specs. The plus sign indicates that this spring is slightly stronger than what a normal one would be, but within factory specs. And the same here. It's slightly higher than the normal, but within factory specs. This one has a minus sign on it. That means it's slightly less than the factory specs, but still within the acceptable range. And this one has a 0 on it, which means it's exactly equal to factory spec. CS014F is the front spring. So these two springs go together. This is CS014F. This is CS036R, that goes in the rear. The same thing for here. The two front springs have pluses on them, so they can go on either side. They're equal to each other. The 0 and the minus are not equal. This is less strong than this one. Within spec, but less strong than what this one is. The driver's side is the torque side of the vehicle, which would want a little bit more spring than the passenger side. So we're going to put the one with the 0 on the driver's side, and we'll put the one with the minus on the passenger side. The next thing on the spring is stenciled the name Old Man Emu, and that's on all 4 springs. And this last set of numbers up here must have been an old part number of some sort. IP24 is the same thing as IP24. These two are the front springs. The rear spring is 8A24, 8A24. These are the rear springs. We need to identify where the springs go after we paint. And what I'm going to do is put a loop of wire through the end of the spring to represent the stationary point, and I'll put 1 loop in for the first point, 2 loops in for the second point, 3 loops in for the third point, and 4 loops in for the fourth point. And I will do that same thing on the frame so that when they're all painted, I'll know exactly how they're supposed to be orientated. We have installed on the springs are identifying wire loops for the locations of where the springs go, and also on the frame. So now I think we're ready to paint. Those of you that follow me know what happens next. We give it a bath in paint thinner, and then 2 coats of primer and 2 coats of finish. We'll start with the bath of paint thinner. And this is just to clean everything up. And if we lose the markings, which we're not, it's not a big thing. Here goes the first coat of 2 coats of primer, and then 2 coats of finish coat on top of that. And that's the final coat. The light helps me see dry spots and helps me keep a nice wet edge. Hey Glenn, can I ask you a question? Sure, go ahead. Why do we have 3 different finishes here? Well, I can answer that question. These 3 have been sandblasted. This is the way it came from the manufacturer. It has a crinkle finish on it. I don't like crinkle finishes. So I'm going to sandblast this off also, and then we're going to powder coat these in a semi-gloss chassis correct black, smooth. These were designed and produced by a fellow named Jim. I don't know his last name. And they're sold as part of the kit of the Old Man Emu kit for the CJ7. And these have a machine finish to them. And what we'll do is we'll sandblast them to give them the same texture as this, and then we'll powder coat all of them. We'll put some nice semi-gloss black powder on Jim's shackles here. And into the oven they go. And out they come. And this is what they look like out of the oven. They match the chassis nicely. It's been covered for so long, I almost forgot what was underneath here. But in fact, it's a CJ7 frame. I've temporarily bolted the power steering gearbox in place, and it's just hanging from the bolts on the frame. Because I wanted to see what it's going to look like with a new shackle in there, and that's what it looks like. It fits real nice. The only problem is that if you remember, when I disassembled this, the nut inside the frame here came out of the frame. It rusted right out. And I didn't think we needed it. I was thinking we were just going to put the shackle here. I'd forgotten about the power steering gearbox. But we've got to have a nut up inside the frame in order to bolt this power steering gearbox up. I've come up with an idea. That hole is right here. And I've got a hole here and a hole here. My little finger can actually reach that hole in there. What I think I'm going to do is make a little piece of metal, square piece of metal, that'll sit in the bottom of the frame. I'll drill a hole in it and thread it for the bolt that goes in here. And then I can push it in place through this hole here. And the fact that it's square, sitting in the bottom of the frame, will allow me to tighten that bolt. We'll cut a piece off this scrap. We'll smooth out the edges. And now we'll tap it. Goes in. This is plan B. I didn't like the threads that were put into the piece of metal, so I'm just going to weld a nut to the back of this plate, and we'll put that whole thing right inside the frame. Here's plan B. We made this plate with the nut welded to it, and what we're going to do now is we're going to drop it down into the frame. Take a flashlight, and we can actually look down in there and put the bolt over the hole. And now we're going to try to feed the bolt up through the bracket and into the nut. And I think I did it. We did it. And now we can tighten that down. That's just as good as new. I've got all the nuts and bolts tumbled and powder coated. I powder coat the heads of the bolts so they don't rust, and I powder coat the nuts so they don't rust. I've got all the hardware powder coated. I've installed the shock towers and the sway bar so we can demonstrate hooking them up as if this was an assembled Jeep. We have to talk a little bit about these mounts. This is the front hanger that we need to replace the stock hanger with. And there's some features about it that we need to talk about. The first one is that this hole right here locates the hanger on the frame. That's the big rivet that's underneath the frame. You no longer have to cut it off. That's used for a location. These two bolt holes are existing bolt holes in the frame. And this bolt hole right here is a blind bolt hole that is in the shackle mount, but is not in the frame. We have to drill this hole in the frame in order to put a bolt through. And then it's notched here in the front, and I believe what we can do is slide the stock bumper in there. I'm not going to attempt to do that, but I think that's what this notch is for. We have to know the distance from a known entity. And the two back holes exist on the frame, so we can use that as our starting point. And we want to know the center to center measurement on those holes to the front hole. And what you can do is measure outside edge to inside edge of the holes. I mean, from outside here to the inside here. If you measure that, you'll get the same measurement as you would get for center to center, and it happens to be 2 3/8. We're looking at the bottom, front, passenger side of the frame. These 3 bolt holes were used for the stock spring hanger. And now we're going to move the spring hanger forward. This rivet is going to be our location mark. These 2 back holes are the holes that are going to be used for the back holes in the new spring hanger mount. What we have to do is draw a center line through the rivet and the 2 bolt holes. Just as close as we can get it. And we'll scribe a line where we think that center line is. Well, that's off. Ouch. Let's do it again. I have the ruler flipped over so that I can put it up flat against the frame. That's 1 inch, that's 2 inch, that's 1/8, that's 2/8, that's 3/8. We want to be right there. And now we drill the frame. Okay, now we're going to drill it out to 7/16. Now, if we've done everything right, the bolt should fit in that hole. I'll start 1 bolt to hold the hanger in place. I'm going to leave a little slack so we can get that front bolt in if we got it in the right spot. Now we're looking at the top of the frame, and this is the hole we just drilled. Let's see if we can put a bolt in there. If we put the hole in the right spot, the bolt should go in, huh? Guess what? The bolt went in. Okay. Now we'll tighten up the bottom ones. And with that bolt tight, we've installed our first spring hanger. This is where this mount goes. This rivet won't allow the mount to slide in underneath the power steering gearbox. So we're going to loosen it up. Slide the mount in, and then tighten this bolt back up. Remember, this is the bolt that I put the Plan B in effect. Now let's put the rest of the bolts in. I've drilled the hole for the front, and I've got a bolt in it. So now that everything's lined up, we can tighten the bolts up. Okay, now everything is tight. And the front 2 perches are installed. Remember to clean out the pocket for the bushings. And then we'll just push a bushing into the hanger. Put a bushing in on the other side, trying to engage the sleeve. Wipe off this excess grease here. Just makes a mess. And we'll push it in just the way we pushed them into the springs. You'll know when you're done because the sleeve will bottom out in the clamp and you won't be able to go any further. Now all we got to do is do the driver's side. Uh-oh, he's sitting in the chair and not working. That's right. Unfortunately, we're going to have a little talk here. And some of it is the history on the vehicle and some of it is Old Man Emu related. This Jeep came to me with a 4.5-inch Rubicon lift in it. And I don't know if they modified these perches or not. I do know that the stock hanger that goes into this perch has a bolt size of 7/16. And I know that the bolt that goes in there for the Old Man Emu kit is a 1/2-inch bolt. So if this is indeed a 7/16-inch hole, you will have to drill it out to a 1/2 inch. Mine's already drilled out to a 1/2 inch for the 4.5-inch Rubicon lift. And that's why I don't know if the shackle's been modified. It doesn't look like it. It looks like it's all stock. I think all you're going to have to do is drill the 7/16-inch hole out to 1/2 inch. That's the first problem. The second problem is I started this project by doing a lot of research. I actually have installed this kit on a Jeep 10 years ago, and I had a great deal of difficulty then because there was no documentation and no support. Turns out that's the same way now. There is really no documentation, no instructions for putting the Old Man Emu spring kit onto a CJ Jeep. I called ARB Old Man Emu, and what they told me is that's something that's really been developed in the aftermarket and put together from other kits. And in fact, this kit came from 4 different sources. So I thought I had the answers to the codes on the springs when I told them to you before. Turns out there's a problem. In the front springs, the arrow is pointing towards the small eyelet in the spring. And the small eyelet traditionally is the shackle end. And the big eyelet on the spring is the fixed mount end. But on the front springs, the arrow is pointing towards the small end. So ARB, Old Man Emu, was given a call, and they were wishy-washy. They didn't really have an answer. They went back and forth. And they said, do what's best. Great. So I'm going to go against what the instructions are. The instructions say that the arrow on the spring is supposed to point to the stationary mount on the frame. But mine is pointing to the shackle end. I'm going to turn them around and I'm going to put the stationary end with the big eye in the fixed mount, which is what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to have the fixed eye in the fixed location and go forward. After that lecture, we're ready to install our first spring. And I'm installing it with the big end into the fixed joint, regardless of what the arrow says. And I'm using the 1/2-inch bolt to put it in place. I'll wipe the grease off the bolt because we don't want grease between the nut and the bolt. We'll put a little anti-seize on it. Put the nut on it. With the rear mount of the spring installed into the fixed point on the frame, we're ready to do the shackle in the front. And what you'll have to do is pick the spring up and put it in position. I have it jacked up so that I can talk. And what we're going to do is take a YJ shackle, not a CJ shackle. You have to go out and buy the YJ shackles, and slide the 7/16 inch bolt into the top one, slide another 7/16 inch bolt into the bottom one, which once again proves to me that this is the way the spring is supposed to go. Put the backing plate on the back, take some anti-seize and put it on the threads. Put your nuts on. With the front shackle snug, we can move on. When we lower this axle down to the springs, there's a peg here that needs to go into a recess in the bottom of the axle saddle. But you have to be careful because there's a recess in the back and a recess in the front. You want to make sure that you get the peg into the right recess. Okay, I guess we're ready. We'll pick it up just a little bit. The axle is going to want to twist forward. Take the block out. We'll go down. We have one peg set, and we have the other peg set. Now we can put the U-bolts over the axles and tie the axle to the spring. Now there is one large U-bolt. All the rest are the same size, but there is one large U-bolt. And that goes on the inboard side, on the passenger side in the front, over the differential. Then the normal one goes over the outside. We take the skid plate that has the shock mount and the sway bar mount in it, and they get mounted to the outside of the vehicle. And we take that skid plate and we run it up over the U-bolts we just put in. And this is kind of a balancing act. And take a nut and put it up there to hold that thing in place. Do it evenly though. Don't just take it all up on one side. Work it up so it's even. And don't forget to put the skid plate into the peg that's on the bottom of the spring. With the U-bolts snugged up, we can see that they're too long, in that they're sticking below the skid plate. In fact, there's an 1.25 inch bolt exposed underneath the skid plate. So we're going to take the U-bolts back off and cut the bottoms off. Now on this axle, the difference in the U-bolts are different because you have a different U-bolt going over the differential, and it wants to be 1 1/8. We're going to add an 1/8 inch to each one of those measurements so that the end of the bolt is up inside the skid plate. This is the big U-bolt. We want to take 1 1/8 inches plus 1/8 so that the end of the bolt is up inside of the skid plate. So we'll mark off 1 1/4 inches for the long one. We'll put a bevel on the end of each U-bolt so that the nut goes on easy. We'll put a nut on the end of each U-bolt to make sure that they screw on. And now we'll go put them in the Jeep. And we'll drop our modified U-bolts in place. And this time is for good, so we'll put some anti-seize on the bottom of the threads. Do the same thing as before. We slide the skid plate up over the bottom of the U-bolts with the shock mount and the sway bar mount to the outside. What we want to do is start a bolt, just like we did the last time, so that the skid plate will hang there for us. Now we take a washer and a nut and put it on the ends of these U-bolts. We got to do all of them, but the U-bolt is kind of hanging there, so it's a little easier. Once you get all 4 nuts up, you take your little impact and run it up evenly all the way to its max. The U-bolts get tightened to 100 foot-pounds. And we're there for that one. All right, we have our first spring mounted. Now is as good a time as any to put the lower shock in, and you'll have to work it into the base. It's going to be a tight fit. Once you get it in position, you can put the bolt in. You can get it all the way through. Once you get the thread sticking through, you can put some anti-seize on it and screw the nut on. Nice and tight. This top mount should slide in because you don't want the shock to be the limiter of the downward travel. I'm off by about 1/4 of an inch. If I sit on the frame, it goes on. A little anti-seize, a washer, and a nut. Tighten it up, and the front shock is installed. If we mount this sway bar link, we're done with the front end. And it goes from here to here. We have to put some anti-seize on the bolt that screws into the skid plate for the lower mount for the sway bar link. I don't have a torque spec for this, so we just want it tight. Okay, that's tight. Once we got the lower mount screwed in, we put a washer on it. We take our modified sway bar link, which looks stock. These are the sway bar links that I have to choose from. These 2 sway bar links were on the vehicle when I got it, but it had a 4.5 inch lift on it, and these are too long. Now I could cut it down and drill a new hole, and then I could make this sway bar link work, but it doesn't look stock. These are stock sway bar links, and they're too short because we're putting in a 2.5 inch lift. But if I cut them in half and take 2.5 inches out of the shank of this 1/2 inch bolt and weld it to the center of this sway bar link, it'll look stock, but it'll be the right length for our 2.5 inch lift. To accomplish that, I've got a piece of angle iron here that I'm going to lay the bolt in and the sway bar link in and weld it. So let's do it. I had to put it in the vise vertically because it wouldn't fit horizontally. And that'll make this cut a little harder, but we can do it. We have our links cut in half. Now we need to cut 2.5 inch sections out of our bolts. With our sway bar links cut in half and a 2.5 inch section added to the center, the sway bar links will be at the right length to keep the sway bar itself at the right height so the geometry of the front end is not changed. So now what we need to do is weld this together. And what I will do is take each one of these joints and grind a V in there, a bevel, so that we get really good penetration with our weld. So here we go. This is our jig to hold the sway bar links in line with each other. I have the sway bar links clamped into the corner of the angle iron, and I have our section snug in the center to make sure that the bushings are in the same plane. I've put a level on it and they're level. So we're ready to weld. I've sandblasted the joint areas so there won't be any contamination in the weld, and now we're going to weld it. We got good hot penetration. Now we're going to grind it down a little bit so it's a little more presentable. Now we have two sway bar links, the correct length, and it'll look stock once it's painted. And slide it on. We take another washer that fits over the shaft, and we take a final washer that goes over the end of the stud so we can put a nut on it. Little anti-seize on the threads, and we start the bolt. Now we take the upper mount bolt and slide it into the sway bar link. And we find that the bolt doesn't go into the hole of the sway bar. And that's because the floor here is not level. Sway bar's purpose is to try to keep the vehicle level. So what this is trying to do is pull up on this side to keep the vehicle level. But if I jack this up, I should be able to slide the bolt in. Well, that didn't work. I'm picking the whole frame up. Maybe if I sit on the frame, I can get it to go down far enough. No, that's closer. There we go. Put a little anti-seize on the end of the bolt. You'll have to put a vice grip on the end of this stud in order to tighten the bolt up, because it's just going to turn until it gets into the seat of the sway bar. I couldn't find a spec in the manual for the torque. I looked it up in Google. It said 14 foot-pounds, which seems light to me, and we're there. I'm going to go just a little more. Now we take the bottom nut of the sway bar link. Until it's tight, we don't have a torque spec, so I'm just going to go like that. Don't forget what I almost forgot. You got to put a cotter pin in here in this upper link. And you tap it in. And bend it around. Okay. I think that truly finishes the front end. We'll dress this up a little more. There. That's better. It's time to move on to the rear. And all the shocks, stock springs, stock spring hangers have all been removed. And now we're ready to move forward with the installation of the Old Man Emu springs in the rear. Using our wire code to decipher the location of springs, we have 3 loops of wire on this spring and 3 loops of wire hanging off the frame here. This end of the spring goes into this mount. We take the big 1/2-inch bolts that were provided in the kit, and we slide the spring into position, and we slide the bolt in. We wipe the grease off the bolt that it picked up going through the sleeve, because we don't want to grease the threads. And we put a little bit of anti-seize on the threads. And put our nut on. So we want to just snug it up so we can put the back mount on. That's good. And this is the passenger side rear. And what we have to do is put the new shackle mount in for the Old Man Emu springs. This is the stock rear shackle mount, and this is the new rear shackle mount. The stock rear shackle mount has 2 holes in it. Those two holes correspond to the two holes that are in the base of the new shackle mount, but we have a third hole in the shackle mount. And what we're going to do is bolt this up to the frame using the two existing holes to locate the position for this hole. And because there's no rivet in the center, we can bolt it flat to the frame. We're going to use a center punch, which is a rod the size of the hole that has a little point in the center of it, and we'll put it in the shackle mount and hit it with a hammer, and that'll locate the position for that bolt. If you remember, I re-tapped all these holes, so that's why the bolts go in. Now that the mount is bolted into place, we can take our center punch, put it in the hole, and hit it. And that'll give us a point to start drilling. Find our punch mark and start drilling an 1/8" pilot hole. With these two bolts loosely in place where I can still move the hanger, we'll put the third bolt in, and I'll remind you what plan B is. If you remember, I had a problem in the front of the frame where when I took the bolt out, the nut came right out with the bolt. So I had a hole in the frame. So what I did is I took a plate like that and welded a nut to it, and I put that into the frame. And then when you screw the bolt into it, it can't turn because it's too long to turn inside the frame, and you can tighten the bolt. All you got to do is get it inside the frame. Well, we have a nice hole right here, and you can literally look right down onto the hole that we drilled in the bottom. So this should be pretty straightforward. So we drop our little plate inside and move it over to the hole, and we can stick the pointer up through the hole in the bottom to line the bolt up. Then we take our bolt, put it in the hole, and gently screw it into the nut. And now we can tighten it up. And our rear mount is in position. Don't forget to clean out the shackle mount. Now we can install our bushings. I've jacked the spring up so that we can put our rear shackle in. I don't want to struggle with the shackle and the spring at the same time. We take our 7/16" bolt and slide it into the upper. We take another 7/16 and slide it into the lower. We take a little anti-seize and put it on the threads. Put the backing plate on. Put the backing plate on, put the nuts on, and tighten it up. And the shackle is installed. With the rear shackles in place, we can now put the axle in place. There's a little pin right here that's actually the head of a bolt, and on the bottom of the saddle for the axle, there's a hole that pin goes into. So we have to pick this thing up and put the hole on the pin. Like that. With the axle in place, we can put the U-bolts in. It's a tight fit. It scratches my paint. With the shock mount forward and on the inside, we can mount the U-bolt skid plate And once we got all 4 nuts on, we can tighten them up a little bit. All right, now that we've gotten it tightened up, we've got a problem. And the problem is that the U-bolts are too long. They stick out below the skid plate. There's no sense in having a skid plate if the bolts stick out below the bottom of it. So we're going to have to cut the bolts off. And I've measured it out, and we've got to cut off 3/4 of an inch. And we'll cut it off. We'll put some anti-seize on the threads and put the skid plate up with the shock mount forward and in, and put the U-bolt through the holes in the skid plate and line it up with a hole in the spring, and now put a nut on. Now with the nut on, the plate will hang there, and we can put a washer and a nut on each end of the U-bolt. We ran these nuts all the way up as far as we could with a little impact. The manual says they want 100 foot-pounds on this. That seems like a lot to me. But they say they want 100 foot-pounds. We're going to go there. But if it feels like it's going to strip on me, I'm going to stop. We want it to go up evenly, so we'll take a little bit of time on each one. And 100 on that one, that feels right. I'm going to take the weight off this gradually because I don't know if the frame is going to flip up or not. So here we go. Let's see how much is there. Ooh, not much. Installing this shock is the second to the last thing we have to do to complete the install of the Old Man Emu springs. And we need to put the lower mount into the skid plate for the U-bolts. So we just screw that into the hole that's on the inside forward location and tighten it down. And slip a washer on. Take the shock and put the lower mount on. Another washer. Another washer with a small hole in it the size of the stud and a nut. And screw that in loosely. Then if we've done everything right, the top should slide in. Put some anti-seize on the bolt. Put a washer on and a nut. And now we can tighten these down. I could not find a spec in the book on how tight to tighten these bolts. Google says 14 pounds. There we go, 14 pounds. With this shock installed, we're very close to being complete. We have 3 things we need to do. They're important. The first thing we need to do is, 1, check our bolts for tightness. I did find a torque spec for the shackle bolts. They want 24 foot-pounds on these shackle bolts. So we got to check all the shackle bolts. Check your U-bolt clamps to make sure they're at 100 foot-pounds. I found a torque spec for the upper stud on the shock in the front and the back, and it's 45 foot-pounds. So we're good there. I couldn't find a torque spec for the sway bar bolts, but they're cotter pinned. We did that a while back, so they're tight. Number 2, grease all 12 of the grease fittings that we just installed. And I'm putting 5 pumps into each one. Number 3, you have to sit back and enjoy your accomplishment. This is really not a kit. It's an assembly of parts of other kits that make it possible to put the YJ springs onto a CJ. When you take this thing out on the road after 50 miles, you should go back and retorque all the bolts. And anytime you go off-road, you should retorque all the bolts. I think the kit has left out several things. Number one is you have to have YJ shackles in order to make it work. And normally you would have CJ. So you got to go out and order the YJ shackles. Number two is you have to do something with the sway bar links. You could probably get by with a stock sway bar links, but you really should extend them so the sway bar is in the correct geometry. Number three is that the brake hoses need to be replaced because you're raising the vehicle 2.5 inches. Your stock lines probably are not going to be long enough, so you need brake hoses. And number four, and the one I really don't understand, is there's no instructions anywhere. And there's not a lot of support either. A lot of it's hearsay. I think the kit is worthwhile. When we put the YJ springs on my last CJ, the ride was fantastic. And that's why I did it this time, because I'm going to appreciate the ride rather than the install. I think we can take this off the task board. I think we have it done. I think we completed the task. If you enjoyed the video, there will be more. That's it.